This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI Podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr. Barb.
And I'm Trudy.
And today in the studio we have Connal McClean. Now I've got that right, haven't I, Connal?
Yeah, that's perfect. Kia ora, thanks for having me.
I like to have people's names said right from the start, see if I can get things going. Today's episode we are calling Learning About Learning Background. No, just learning about learning. The background's the next title, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, God, punctuation, Barbara. Sort this out. Learning about learning. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Learning about learning. Learning about learning. Does that mean you've got a teaching degree?
No. So I always kind of see myself as between these two worlds of education and zoology or behaviour.
Right.
So my background is very much in behaviour, but I am now...
Oh, I see you've got a beautiful T-shirt there as well.
Oh, yeah.
Weeds feed bees. Plant flowers, not lawns. Fantastic. Sorry, just noticed that.
No, all good. So my research so far has focused on learning and memory in bumblebees.
Right. So when we're talking about learning, we're talking about bees learning rather than people learning. So it's learning about how bees learn.
Yes, exactly. And
Right.
I hope to do some more work in the future looking at how we can take learning models that we've used in animals to more effectively teach humans. So a little bit of learning.
Really? Do you think that will work?
How do we know? Well, how do we know bees learn?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Back to basics. We'll start with the warm-up. So your background, you did your undergraduate in biological psychology at the University of California at Davis.
Yeah.
How on earth did you end up being in America? Why would you do that?
Yeah, it wasn't all my choice. I'm from Auckland originally, so Kiwi at heart, but moved overseas when I was quite young with my parents just for work. So we actually
So it wasn't your
moved.
choice; it was your parents' work.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. And you were just going to school,
Yeah, just
like a
along
regular
for the ride.
kid.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so we went to the UK and then ended up in the US for a
right.
lot of my childhood up until college, really.
Right.
And then, came back to Aotearoa, 5 or 6 years ago now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So that explains the slight accent there.
Yes, yeah, and it will change.
I just thought that was because he was from Auckland.
It'll change depending on who I'm talking to as
Right.
well. My supervisor, one of my supervisors for my master's was American.
Right.
So the American comes out more
Dr.
with her.
Jenny Yant.
Yep,
so
exactly.
Keen listeners of the OI podcast
They
will
will
know
know.
that we have had Jenny on here before. So, yes, so pop back. We did buzzing the bees buzz. I can't remember what we called it. It was something like that, the episode title, but it was... Can you remember, Trudy?
No.
It was about
It was
buzzing.
really
It was mostly
interesting.
about bees and about buzzing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she was wonderful to have on. But yes, very American twang.
Yes.
But we're very happy to have her here in Dunedin and New Zealand as a whole, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And welcome back yourself. Yes.
Kia ora.
So you're here. You've done a master's, and I guess that's why you first came to Otago, to Dunedin, to do a master's at the zoology department here, and that was with Jenny.
Yes, correct.
Yep. And you've also got certificates in science communication and plant science. So I imagine that science communication is quite a big part of your kind of world of science as we go.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I got the certification in science communication while I was doing my master's. Because if you're doing some further education and further study, you can't just focus just on that. You know, you've got to have your distractions along the way.
Right, the side quests.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
we need to
So
have our side quests.
I managed to do a bunch of outreach events with Tahura Otago Museum.
Right.
And so we actually took...
Shout out to Tahura there.
Yeah, big shout out to Tahura over there. So we actually took the one of the protocols I used in my learning research with bumblebees, and you have the bees in this little clear box.
Right.
And so I thought, hey, that's really
Now, these
good
aren't
for
native
this.
bees, are they? These
No,
are
no.
British bees
These
or
are,
European
the
bees.
European bumblebees.
Bumblebees, yeah.
But
Just
we
to be clear.
I'm just
Judy's shaking her head.
Yeah.
yes.
Well, There might be cultural imperatives into how they learn here.
There could be. We'll have to find out.
So you were playing. Was it just a game or education, or what was the object?
So
of
it was. The thing was, we could take a toothpick and dip it in sugar water.
Right, which the bees obviously like.
Yes, so it's imitating the floral nectar reward that they'd get out in the wild.
Right.
But a kid or whoever was coming by to these outreach events, primarily kids, lots of kids and families.
Did you make them lollipops for them?
No, that would be a good
that'd be
idea.
an interesting learning as well. Yeah.
Just a toothpick.
I don't know.
They've got a simple palate. That's all they need, yeah. But the people were able to feed a bee, which was, something that most people cannot say they've ever done.
Right.
So it was a really great hook to just open up the
so you
door
just
for those
had
conversations
the bees
about
safe
bees.
in a little kind of cube of
Exactly.
perspex or something.
Yeah.
And then you'd just put the little toothpick in, and then the people could watch the bee close up, basically, without being afraid that they were going to get stung
Exactly.
or bitten. And then the bee would be happy because it was getting treats.
Yeah, and free treats, pretty much, not having to fly all around for sugar.
So they know they sold their soul? They're on display for free sugar.
Did they care?
I don't know if they'll mind.
But
Yeah.
what was the learning aspect of that?
Yeah.
Were the bees learning?
Yes. So in my master's research, we used those boxes for a protocol that was called the Free Moving Proboscis Extension Response Protocol. So it's a huge jumble of words to basically say...
Say it again, the
Free Moving Proboscis Extension Response Protocol.
Right. So the
It
proboscis
sounds
is
like
just...
the dog thing.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and
so the
that's,
proboscis is like the big
Tongue.
big
bitty-
tongue.
Yeah,
of
so
the
it's a
bees.
straw type thing that uncurls, same as moths and butterflies.
Exactly, yeah. And it's pretty much, you've probably
With
heard
Pavlov's
of
dogs.
Pavlov's dogs. That's
Yes.
kind of the intro I use for associative learning with folks. It tends to ring a bell.
So how does this work? So you watch to see if they uncurl their proboscis? If it's free moving?
So the kind of overall goal is to have the bee, an individual bee, make an association between, in this case, an odor, a smell, and reward.
Yeah.
So we had essentially two sides of the box, and you're inserting a strip of paper, one that's been just dipped in water without sugar, and one that's been dipped in a sugar water solution.
Right. So the one that's just dipped in water is just your control to make sure it's not just liquid that they're after.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And so each of these strips is inserted in front of an odor. You can also do this for different colors. Dip a red paper in sugar water and yellow in regular water, for example.
Right.
And then through successive trials, the bee hopefully learns to associate an odor with the sugar water reward and not associate the other odor with just the control, the plain water.
So you're seeing how quickly it learns.
Yeah.
How many times it goes to the wrong control just to check if it's there. Because I guess, like by chance, it could just go to the right one first time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so in this protocol, we're switching the sides between each round. So if
so you've got the control on one
left,
side and the treatment on the other, and then you switch them over so that it's not learning the
Do
side.
you do that randomly?
You do follow an order, but we randomized which side it started on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so there's so many little tiny controls you need to do for learning stuff. It can get quite complex.
So you're doing all this with bumblebees?
Yes.
Why bumblebee?
Why bumblebees?
So it's almost in fashion at the time. There's been a lot of work done on honeybees, which are also from Europe. And a different type of bee, but they have a global prevalence. So there's been a lot of work.
Prevalence just means they're everywhere, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Just try and keep the jargon to a minimum here.
Gotcha.
That's what you pick up on jargon. I think.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of work and a lot of focus on honeybees because they are really good pollinators, but so are bumblebees and bumblebees and
so
honeybees.
are moths.
Yes,
Lots of things are very good pollinators.
Exactly.
Not that I'm overly obsessed with moths.
No.
Honeybees do get all the glory, don't they?
Exactly. And so that's something we're trying to kind of change the narrative on, because
Your T-shirt's not helping there.
No, it's featuring a honeybee, but it tends to be an animal that lots of folks know.
Right.
And so it can, again, just kind of get your foot in the door to start that conversation about, hey, honeybees and bumblebees are actually, only 15 or so % of the bees, the 20,000 plus different types of species of bees all over the world.
Right.
But yeah, so we used bumblebees in this instance for a number of reasons. They're easy to rear. They have a very stable nest.
So you breed
lifestyle.
your own bumblebees?
Yeah, so these bees were caught in the wild by my other supervisor, Dr. Lisa Evans, who's at Plant and Food Research.
Right.
So one of the aspects we were looking at for the learning was if colonies reared from queens caught in an environment where they had just a couple floral species, so like a crop monoculture you can imagine in an agricultural system, versus queens and colonies that were from a botanic gardens where they have access to hundreds, dozens of different
So how much
floral
sort of
species.
institutional knowledge there is in the hive?
Yeah. If there's
bumblebee's still called hives. Is it a swarm or is it a colony? What is it called?
Yeah, so it gets a bit needlessly tricky with a lot of the social insects. You'll get some pedants who say you can only call a honeybee hive a hive because that's what the definition of a hive is.
Right, yeah. Just as I was saying it, I thought, I think I've got that wrong there.
Yeah, so it's, with bumblebees, you can call it a hive or a nest, a colony. Somewhat interchangeable, and as long as you're not talking to a honeybee researcher, 99.9 times you'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah, colony always seems a little bit kind of British Empire-y, doesn't it?
Yeah, but that's when we were talking to Janice, was it? Jenny. We talked about we were taking some bees back to the UK, so we were going to recolonise.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's totally fine to talk about colonies. Yes. True. Sorry.
Yeah.
You weren't here for that
all
interview. We're
good.
just going to carry on. Honestly.
So we can't remember the title of it, but we know what was in it. So I think that's
You've got the context.
It was very clever, though.
It was.
Hey, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No,
I can't even remember what we're talking about now. So the rearing of the bees and whether the bumblebee. So it's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Whether there's like that kind of institutional knowledge in the colony or
So
the nest. And was there? What was the answer?
So we did find in my experiment, we found that there was weak evidence of a genetic carryover of learning. So in colonies that were so I should explain the premise of the experiment as well. We took these colonies from either botanic gardens or a crop monoculture setting and then brought them into an artificial glasshouse setting where they were either kept in their high diversity or switched from high to low or vice versa, kept taken from low floral diversity environments and put into a low floral diversity environment versus taken from low and put into high.
Yeah. And when you say low, with the low floral diversity, was it the same type of floral?
Yes, yeah. So we used.
So it wasn't just that it was low; it was the same type. So if you had clover outside, you had clover inside for your.
No, sorry. So they were primarily from lupin and lavender farms out in the wild. So we had lupin and cornflower as our low floral diversity environment.
Because I'm just wondering if they're. Like if you've got something that's genetically tuned into lavender, it's low floral diversity, but then if you put it in an environment that's low floral diversity but a completely different flower, there's no reason why they would actually associate that flower.
Yep, exactly. So lots of tiny, niggly little factors there.
That sounds fun.
But so overall we did find weak evidence that there was a genetic spillover. So the queens and colonies from high diversity environments that were placed into high diversity had better learning.
Right.
So there might be some genetic link to
Were they the same bees, though? that had previously, like the individuals, were they the same bees that had been in the Botanic Gardens, or were they the next generation of bees?
Yeah, so it's the next generation.
Right, so there wasn't any like actual learning that they had carried back from being in the Botanic Gardens.
The genetic primers that they've received through heredity that may make them more
So all these bees were all
to
bees
learning.
that had themselves, the individual bees, not been exposed to any flowers outside of this artificial environment. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, and so there was some weak DNA signal.
Yeah, so there was
it could have
some
been
weak
epigenetics,
evidence.
couldn't it?
Yes, yeah. So and that's where we're kind of trying to tackle that nature versus nurture question.
Right.
And there's more and more evidence that it's not nature versus nurture. It's an interaction of both.
This whole dichotomy of things is always like, people love it because it makes good headlines. But honestly, is it ever the case that it's one thing or the other?
No, humans love to sort things into boxes, but biology can't be sorted into boxes in any instance.
Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, so...
Poor Trudy's just sitting here rolling her eyes.
I'm so pleased my taxpayer science dollars going
It's really interesting stuff.
It is interesting.
It's really interesting stuff.
Is that B.F. Skinner? Did he do biological psychology or something? No.
Yeah, so Skinner did a lot, biological psychology and operant conditioning.
On people, not bees. I think what I'm struggling with is, why are we doing it on bees? Why don't we just do it on people? It'd be far more interesting.
That's a really good question.
I think the ethics are quite a lot more difficult to get right.
Yes, I think you might be a bit hard-pressed to get a grant to put children in different glasshouse environment.
Yeah, I thought it was school myself. Like, we've got to...
I guess having something happen in a model system like bumblebees doesn't mean that it does happen in other...
Not necessarily,
even in other insects, let alone other animals, let alone people.
Yeah.
But the fact that it can happen in something else allows for the possibility that it could be a mechanism in people.
Yeah.
So it's like small steps. It's like small steps.
Yeah, exactly. And Trudy raises a really good question, why bumblebees? And so bumblebees are actually really important pollinators. So it's estimated that 1/3 of every human mouthful of food is made by bees alone.
Oh, so we really should understand what's going on with them.
So there's been a lot of focus recently on the use of pesticides and how even if they're not outright killing bees, there can be sublethal effects. And a lot of those sublethal effects, so they're not actively toxic, they're not dying immediately, but a lot of those sublethal effects are on cognition. So they're not just
brain damage, wandering around brain damage, basically.
And especially with honeybees and bumblebees, they're doing the work for all their young. So even if one forager, one worker bee isn't killed by a pesticide, but she's not able to optimally forage and not able to provide for the colony, it could lead to the death of the whole colony.
So then they're malnourished, the children.
Yeah, exactly. So it's there's a lot of factors, but it's
poverty effects in bumblebees.
Yeah, impoverished.
Bumblebee babies. Are bumblebee babies cute?
They're larvae, aren't they?
Yeah, they're
when they hatch out.
They're little grubby things.
No, after they stop being grubs.
Babies are grubby things.
I think I might be a bit biased, but I'd say they're cute.
Yeah, good. All right. We'll leave that alone. So bumblebees. Goodness me. Did you get stung much?
No. So I got stung 3 years working with them. 5 if you include working on other projects. I got stung 3 times.
Oh, wow. That's very good.
Yeah.
And is that because they were generally quite docile, or did you have protection equipment?
No. So we
just didn't hassle them?
We had no protective equipment. Don't tell human safety and health and safety there. But
I think the cats
they're extremely docile, and the times you get stung by a bumblebee, you deserve that.
Well, it's true. I've only ever been stung by a bumblebee once, and it had or its parent, it had made a nest in the bay window of the lounge, and I sat on it. So it's totally, it was, I didn't realise it was there, and I didn't sit on it on purpose. But oh my goodness, and bumblebees, of course, can sting more than once.
Yes,
unlike honeybees.
Yeah, so I should clarify that I got stung on 3 occasions throughout the duration of my work. But one thing we found was a favourite of bumblebees, because they've got these lovely big mandibles, is to bite onto you and then repeatedly sting.
Yeah, no, it's a totally different. And obviously, I've been stung by honeybees a lot as a kid, running around barefoot and stuff. But being stung by a bumblebee is a whole different kettle of fish, because you do end up with a whole lot of stings in almost the same place.
Yeah.
And
But I'll just, hammer home again, that was because we were getting up into their nests to, document their nest growth, photographing the nests up close. So it was entirely on us.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously with me as well, I sat on it. So.
Are they furry?
Yeah, they are.
And
that actually, it plays into their role in pollination. So,
because it gets on the
pollen sticks all over them.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons. So bumblebees actually engage in a specific type of pollination called buzz pollination or sonication. And
that sounds fancy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sonication.
And they actually, because they're much chunkier than a honeybee and much fluffier, so they get in and they vibrate at a certain sonic frequency that actually collects pollen to them.
So they have to roll around and they do the right moves and it comes to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's that whole thing that people say that bumblebees theoretically shouldn't be able to fly, but I'm sure that's just a myth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless you work for Boeing or something, but then
I'm sure that's just a myth, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, because obviously...
Well, they fly.
Because they fly, right? So it's just that we didn't understand the physics 100% of how bumblebees are doing it, right?
And it's a good little anecdote to pass around from Bee Movie, for example.
Right. I'm sure it's
so when they come back, how do they dance again to get rid of the pollen, or do they fly through something as they go in the hive that scrapes it off, or like a car wash, or?
So once they're back in their nests, like collecting pollen. They do self-grooming, but also social grooming.
Just like dogs.
Yeah,
Cats,
exactly.
Cats.
Yeah, so you can imagine it almost cats and dogs or monkeys picking ticks and lice off of each other.
So is it like electrostatic that makes the pollen stick to the bumblebee in the first place?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of that, and this gets a bit beyond my area of expertise. But as bees are flying, they generate I don't want to misspeak, but they generate a charge.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's positive or negative. But they generate a charge that differs from the flower, and this also plays so it allows the pollen to essentially
stick onto them.
Yeah, fly over to them.
Right.
But it also as a bee visits the flower itself, it changes the charge of that flower, and bees can actually...
so they can tell if other bees have been there.
Yes.
Oh, that's very clever.
Yeah, so bees have a amazing suite of sensory mechanisms.
Yeah, and of course they see different colours to us as well.
Yeah, they've got so many senses that go beyond human. Beyond, one of those
so their
is...
perception of the environment is just totally different to what we're seeing, which is really funky to think about.
Yeah, no, and when you're trying to get into the brain of a bee, you really have to...
Yeah, because they're not seeing what we're seeing. Like, if you can sort of see, like, electric charges, and you can... Like, the whole world would look completely different, right? It's crazy. And not just that, but you've got the whole UV that they can see that we can't
UV
see.
Spectrum,
and it's so limited.
So how do we know that they see... They can see different...
that's the biological structure of their eye.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. Right.
And I guess people have done experiments like Connal here.
Oh, yeah. No, but if you go, it's the structure.
But the cones in their eye are actually... Well,
right.
I'm talking about moths here, but I'm sure that bees are the same. The cones in their eyes are actually different.
Yeah.
So they're physiologically different.
They're physically different, Interesting. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that whole charge thing just amazes me, But then we should sort of also clarify that the bees themselves aren't eating the pollen, right? They're eating the nectar.
So they're actually eating both.
Oh, they're eating both.
Yeah,
because
so
with the moths, they're just eating the nectar rather. So the pollen, with moths and moth pollination, then the pollination is just kind of happening. The moths are going to the flower for the nectar, and they're picking up the pollen by accident, and then they go to the next flower for the nectar and depositing the pollen. Yeah. Again, by accident or by design of the flowers. So the flowers are kind of using the moths as a intermediary in their kind of sexual play. Yeah. But tell us how the bees are different.
Yeah. So, for other pollinating insects and animals, birds, geckos, for example, it's almost comes along with getting the nectar. The plant is getting pollinated, so that's a benefit, and the plant is happy to give up some nectar.
Well, the plant's giving the nectar on purpose, right?
Yes,
that's its incentive.
Yeah.
So it's the only point of the nectar from the plant's point of view is to attract these things to then trick them into carrying its pollen around.
Yeah, and so once you get into Hymenoptera, which is the insect family that includes bees, wasps, and ants, they use nectar for a carbohydrate source, but use other things such as pollen, or in the case of wasps, carrion, meat. They use it for protein. So protein is really important for the larvae, for those developing broods
and that's
of
different
insect.
there because that group, the ants, wasps and bees, they're directly feeding their young as larvae, as opposed to moths and butterflies where they're just depositing the eggs on a good-looking plant of whatever description, and then the eggs just hatch by themselves and the larvae, the caterpillars, just eat the leaves. So they're just left on their own. So it's a whole different kind of breeding strategy there.
Yes, but because, lots more parental investment.
So there's more parental investment, and they're kind of, because they're feeding these growing larvae, then the larvae have different resource needs, which is that protein as well. Interesting.
Yeah, and so nectar is a good, quick energy source.
Right.
But they'll also be collecting adult foragers will be out collecting pollen for their babies, essentially.
Yeah, interesting.
So when bees come and collected the pollen, and then it changes the plant.
The charge.
No other bee will go there. How does that plant get pollinated then?
So it won't be
permanent.
A permanent, yes.
Right, okay.
Won't be a permanent change. So as the flower then, recognizes that it's low on nectar and produces more, that will kind of bring it back to an equilibrium or bring it back to that differently charged state, to indicate to other insects, hey,
I'm here, I'm available.
I'm available, yes.
God, it's like a dating app.
Plants are really, really amazing. Some of the things, like we have a lot of flowers that change colour, and there's evidence that they change colour based on whether or not they've been pollinated or not. So they're actually, they start off, they'll be either white or purple, and then they'll change.
They put a bit of makeup on or something.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah.
And it's quite, plants,
it is quite.
Like the whole
survival strategy.
Well, the whole co-evolution between flowers and insects and pollination is really amazing, and how intricate it can be coming down, because some, just with those pairs, sometimes they're really tightly paired. Darwin's long-tongued moth, where he sort of predicted the existence of this incredibly long-tongued moth decades before it was actually discovered, just based on the form of the flower. I think he predicted the moth based on the flower rather than the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you said, a really long-standing and intricately interwoven evolutionary history. These plants and animals have evolved.
They're really quite
so
extremely
close.
codependent on each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that we're always talking about, of the risk of extinction, because when you've got things that are so tightly tied together with their survival, if one of the pairs goes extinct, then the other one can still be there for quite some time, because all the adults just haven't happened to died. So in that case, it would obviously be the plants that can just exist there. But if they haven't got a pollinator and they had a specific pollinator, and that's a bit what happened with the wood rose. Big pollination of the wood roses with the New Zealand native bats, and of course with the bats extremely decline, then it's really hard for the wood rose to be pollinated. So it's still there, but then it's really hard to procreate.
Yeah. And it could be too late because the pollinator's gone. By the time you realise something's amiss,
it could be too late. Yeah, and that's one of the tricky things with climate change and things moving, because you get climate change, if you get environmental conditions changing, you could get it that, yes, things that are mobile, like the insects, might be able to change their distribution and geographical where they are, basically. But things that are less able to disperse then might not be able to keep up. And you get this mismatch between food sources and the thing that's eating them, or pollination partners. There's all those, you start destabilising an ecosystem and all sorts of things go haywire, and things that you've never even thought of. And that's the trouble with the biological impacts of climate change.
Well, it would be resource use as much as climate change. Like if you change what you use,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even just habitat destruction, or land use change, you start changing the whole of the Mackenzie country from being a dry, arid grassland to being pasture grass that's really irrigated, and it's pasture grass of introduced species from other countries. Grostis capillaris, hay, all sorts of things.
No, and interestingly, in Aotearoa, the bumblebee was actually brought over as a specific pollinator. So it was brought over. We brought initially with all of our livestock, we brought lucerne and alfalfa and clover as feed for these larger animals, cows and pigs and sheep. But honeybees can't pollinate them. So that was actually why the bumblebee was introduced to New Zealand, was to
fill that gap.
So you can, and it wasn't known until we brought them over. So it was one of those things that you don't really know how integral that tiny component of an ecosystem is.
It's interesting because they brought the cows and sheep over. And then they brought the food for the cows and sheep over, and then they brought the pollinators for the food over.
And now we ship the food back. The cows and sheep back.
And there's parts of that where they're now bringing, the parasitoids of the food. With ragwort came amongst all of that food.
Yeah.
Stuff just as seeds coming in, and now of course they're bringing in like the natural enemies of ragwort to try and get rid of this. It's just like this crazy kind of, I don't know, just it's a chain that just keeps going on and on
very,
and on.
very complex system interactions.
Yeah, and I always do worry that we actually don't really have much of a, there's only so many interactions that you can study in a lab setting, and then you really can't predict what's going to happen once everything's out in the wild. So I do kind of think, we should be very cautious when we're doing these things, because, just because we mucked things up once doesn't mean that adding, at some point you've just got to stop.
No, and I think we're very fortunate here in Aotearoa to recognise the importance of biosecurity and the extent to which we do practice biosecurity and everything. Because you can look throughout human history, and especially with insects, we've been quite cavalier in introducing random stuff, unstudied stuff into
But having said that, we have got a lot of introduced species of insects and plants in New Zealand. I mean, we've got as many introduced plants as we have native plants in New Zealand, which is quite high.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's kind of like the story about the little old lady who swallowed a fly.
Oh yeah, it's
and
exactly
then she
like that.
swallowed a spider. Then
that is what
people must. That is what
biocontrol is exactly like. It's like the little old lady who swallowed a fly, and then she swallowed a spider to eat the fly.
And wriggled and jiggled and whatever inside of it. Yeah, I know. So,
I know.
I wonder where that came from. Perhaps they'd witnessed some event.
I think it's
an early biosecurity threat.
I think it's a little story, saying, once you've done something, don't just keep doing the same thing. It's just making it worse. Yeah, that's my theory on why that story arose.
So is it true that bees dance to send messages back to where the good food sources are?
Yeah, and do bumblebees do it as well?
Yeah, so honeybees do. They're very well studied for what's called the waggle dance. And they can communicate so much information.
It's more twerking than dancing, though, isn't it?
It's a little bit of twerking, yes.
Yeah.
Lots of rump shaking.
Yeah.
Using that twerk, we'll say, they can communicate the distance and very specific location, as well as quality and quantity of a resource. Coming in to say there's, this one excellent flower exactly 1.4 kilometers due northeast. So really amazing, but yes, only honeybees.
Okay.
Yeah. And do you put little tags on them in order to find out if that's really where they are, and then follow the tags like a little
geolocation,
like a little thing on your phone, like you follow the little dot.
Yeah. So for my research, we use RFID trackers to monitor activity kind of entering and leaving the nest. So that's radio frequency identification device tracker.
So they're tiny, tiny, tiny little trackers.
Tiny little trackers.
And they have to go through a specific door, don't they? And then that door says, yes, I know that bee is bee number XYZ.
Yeah, it gives each one a unique... It's a little backpack identifier.
Right.
And in previous stuff and in other studies, we haven't used RFID tags, but just a numbered, colored tag.
Right, but then somebody has to sit there.
How do you put
Exactly.
And either watch the video, which is, I'm sure, a very exciting video.
So exciting.
But so these little RFID tags, they just say this bee came through the door at this time, don't they? They don't actually say where that bee was.
Exactly, yeah. So you really want a complement of when we were doing the color and number tags, we called them floral scans, and it's essentially exactly what you said. You're following bumblebee A red to this flower and documenting.
So how do you follow it?
You run.
Oh, you run, right, okay.
you move very fast.
You need a drone.
And you can imagine that is a little chaotic of
right,
work.
that does sound a little chaotic.
I just got a vision of these bees, and there's all these scientists running around in paddocks.
Exactly, yeah. And so it really just kind of determines what questions you can ask. So, for example, with that kind of study, one scientist essentially following one bee and seeing what flower they interact with for how long, in what order, for stuff like that.
And that must get really confusing if there's a whole bunch of bees in the same place, right? Because you have to...
Yep.
I mean, even though they've got their little tags, right, bees aren't... even bumblebees, which are quite big for bees, aren't that big.
Yep.
They're really quite
They're
small.
quite
and the little
small.
tags that are on them are even smaller.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's quite a tricky thing to be following them around, and also limited by how many you can follow, right?
Yep.
So your replication size must be reasonably...
So I can just imagine at bee headquarters. Right, how are we going to muck with these guys today? Well, you go to that one there, and I might go to that one as well.
Yeah, you just go stand off in the corner and don't go to a flower.
Yeah.
Goodness me. Yeah, no.
And then, for example, using the RFID trackers, you get a timestamp essentially.
Right.
This is when individual red A is leaving the nest, and this is when she's coming back.
Right. So you just assume that she could have gone X distance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the longer she's out, the longer the further she could have gone. But then I guess that's also like she could just be like having you on and just having a sit down.
And that's another thing about some bumblebees. Consistently, there is inconsistency within
they
their
slackers?
behavior.
There's some slackers.
They could be independent thinkers.
Oh, I know. It seems like we all
and
think that these bees are all very industrious, but some of them are slacking off.
Yeah, like
and it isn't a detriment to the colony. So that's a little
maybe they're not slacking off.
evolutionary theory.
Maybe they're
Everyone
running
needs
around
some
scouting out for
downtime.
new places.
Yeah.
Do they get drunk on anything? Like birds can get drunk on food.
On nectar.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure because you can also have a lot of flies that if they eat too much fermented fruit. But
do flies get drunk?
I'm not sure. Not drunk per se, but a state that we'd call
right. Like they do get clumsy or whatever.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and
I mean, the kiruru are just hilarious when they're drunk.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're supposed to say that about drunk kidderoo. You're not supposed to say it about drunk people, but I think kidderoo, it's all right. Wow. But yeah, no, because I mean, it's all how your physiology actually breaks down the ethanol in your system, right? And whether that does it. So I don't know what.
But whether they would stay away from that kind of
food
source
and
or
especially with bees, they could learn that
Yes, they could.
they're not going to be the most efficient foragers if they're drunk.
Hey, there's your next
Well,
experiment.
kidderoo don't seem to learn at all, I would say.
They're a bit dumb, I think.
Well, how do we know?
Apologies to
How do we know?
Yeah, we
Well,
need
they
to,
get drunk on
look at their
plums and
learning.
fly into windows. Yeah.
Right, so interesting. But I guess with birds, you could put little trackers on them because they're slightly bigger. So in the trackers, we can only make them so small, right?
Yeah,
so
you
with,
are a bit
with bigger
limited by
animals,
the-
you can put actual trackers on them and you can actually follow where they've gone. But then with bees...
And bees are also great out in the wild because they bumblebees will fly up to, if they really need to, they'll fly up to 5 kilometers.
Wow, that's a long
for
run,
their
isn't
food.
it?
So you can imagine having a tiny little tracker. You can easily get lost within trees, mountains, hills, or
Gosh,
even
5
just
kilometres.
leaves.
That's quite a distance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And can you scrape the pollen off of them and when they get back to the colony and work out from DNA of the pollen or just from topology what kind of pollen it is, just to double check what flowers they were actually looking at and whether they visited a lot of different flowers or whether they just got all their pollen load from one flower?
Yep. No, that's something that we're looking into in the lab at the moment, especially looking at... So we know that the bees are outside of the nest for X amount of time, but in that time is that one bee visiting multiple individuals of the same flower species, or is she going to a dandelion, then a daffodil, then a rose?
Right.
So yeah, you can scrape the pollen off once they come back and look at the diversity of pollen. Generally, get it down to at least a genus or family level, just to see what.
And are you doing that with
actually
DNA
interacting
or are
with?
you doing that with just, slides and just visual?
Combination of both, yeah.
Because I imagine slides is more time consuming, but a lot cheaper.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The kind of go-to is typically DNA metabarcoding for getting... If you want to get to the species of family, but if you're just getting to family or genus, are we interested in, is this an aster of this general aster group?
Yeah.
That one you can kind of do from morphology.
And I guess you can say, the number of different ones.
Yeah.
Without
So even if
identifying
you can't get them identified, you can say these are for sure different.
But doing the number of individuals of a particular species, then you really need solid DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's another
Within
part
species.
of cognition research that's been going on. Are bees who are doing better on these learning tests, are they, more experienced handling a variety of different flower types, which you'd then see because they had, 10 different types of pollen as opposed to one different type of pollen.
Right, and how do you get the pollen off the bee?
So typically...
I think the fly papers that go in it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different methods you can do. You can have a physical...
like a car wash?
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. As if you put it over the entrance of the nest, that essentially just scrapes the pollen off. Or one thing we've done for out in the wild is catching bees with a net, popping them on ice, which doesn't kill them, but it puts them to sleep for a little bit.
So the cold just makes them calm down to the
exactly.
fact that they
and then
off.
you can literally just scrape it off with a scalpel, not cutting their leg off, but just scraping
gently
the pollen.
scraping it off. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and
And I guess the hairs on bumblebees aren't like moth scales, are they? They don't come off as easy. They just sort of are stuck on better.
So one of the methods I've been using, I was recently working up at Te Papa, Tongarewa, looking at pollen from their collections. So bees from 150 years ago that still have these pollen in their pollen baskets on their legs. And for that, we use a little jelly swab.
Right.
Because obviously you don't want to destroy the very fragile insect body that is the only 150-year-old specimen.
Right.
But you want to see what pollen she's actually collected. So it's there's a whole variety of different methods to use.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I just hope they don't mutate, because they'll have a whole lot of stuff they're going to come back and have us doing, you know.
No, I think we're safe. I think we're safe from the bumblebees. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're safe. So what do people do if they discover a bumblebee nest in their garden and they don't want their puppy getting their nose stung or
fair
their
enough.
4-year-old getting...
Yeah.
falling into a
my
hive.
typical recommendation is if you can leave it, if you can...
sort of fence it off.
Yeah, fence it off. Just keep kids and animals away. Do everything you can to leave it. So change your behavior.
Right. Do they tend to stay in the same place year after year?
Not typically, or at least it wouldn't be the same individuals. So bumblebee colonies die off every year. They're perennial. The colony itself is annual, but the queen is perennial.
Right.
So she will,
So the whole colony dies at the end of the year except for the queen?
Except for the queen.
And how does she survive?
So she essentially hibernates. It's called overwintering.
Right, just like plants.
Yeah, and then some moths and butterflies as well.
Right.
So she lives underground and just stocks up and toughs the winter out, and then will typically go to
when you say stocks up, does she forage herself, or I thought that all the workers came and brought all the food to her? But...
Yeah. So she'll stock up on the stocks that have been made by her workers.
Right.
Yeah. And then typically will move to a new home, but it doesn't have to be brand new. It can be new to the queen.
Right.
So
she could just move into a second.
Yeah, so you can have
home.
A nest in the same spot over different years, but it won't be the same nest,
right.
if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, so they'll typically look for bumblebees. They'll look for a good spot, which can typically be a rat or mouse burrow.
Oh.
They nest underground, and if one queen finds a good one and another queen finds it the next year and it's still good, she'll definitely use it.
So sort of a dry, sunny bank somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it's under our garage, but that's all right.
Yeah, but yeah, so as long as you can avoid the bees and they're not posing
and if they're not, can
imminent danger.
People just give you a ring at zoology and say, hey Connal, can you nip out here and rescue this colony?
Yeah, and so you see it a lot with honeybees when they're swarming.
Yeah, you see that on YouTube all the time.
Called in.
Yeah, and they come and get them, but that doesn't work with bumblebees, right?
It can, but it's less necessary.
Right. I mean, like, there's no beekeepers for bumblebees.
No, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so bumblebees. Yeah, if you find one in your garden, you can definitely contact me at the university.
Just ring the zoology department. They'll find them.
They'll find me.
Or Jenny as well. I'm pretty sure Jenny's on as well. Yeah.
But it's not really as big an issue as a honeybee swarm.
Why is that? Because they're smaller?
Yeah. So
fewer bees in a colony.
Bumblebees will get up to dozens of individuals, whereas honeybees can be tens of thousands.
Right. So it's smaller colonies to start with.
Yeah,
right.
littler issue.
Do bumblebee colonies, do they actually have any honey in them?
So they don't produce anything like what you'd want to eat as honey.
Right.
As a good scientist, we have
eaten
the bumblebee.
Not royal jelly.
Not royal jelly. No, it's nothing like honey. It's
right. Is it not even sweet?
Not really. It's liquid. Yeah, so they have
they don't have combs or like honeycomb that the honeybee has all the honey stuck to, and then with the wax coat on the
so bumblebees have got a much reduced form of that. So it's nothing like the really complex hexagonal combs where you've got layers and layers of repeating comb. But they do construct essentially honey pots out of wax, and that's another important reason that they collect pollen is to form those structures.
To form the wax structures that hold the honey.
Yeah, so it's
So what does it taste like? Go back to that. What exactly does it taste like? Describe it.
It's got no taste.
Yeah,
it's just
very
all watery,
watered down sugar water.
Oh,
like
really?
I couldn't even, I wouldn't compare it to
really
a lolly or
anticlimactic.
anything.
Yeah, I'm disappointed.
Yeah. No, I should have brought some
Yeah.
to try.
And, so royal jelly, what's the difference with that?
So royal jelly is only found in honeybees, and
Right.
it's a food that is nutritionally loaded with everything that a queen needs,
Right.
as well as hormonal cues and nutritive cues for this baby to develop into a queen as opposed to a worker.
Right. So the workers just get food,
Yeah.
and the
Workers get jelly, queen gets royal
jelly. Right.
Now, this might have been on a Doctor Who episode, but don't people use royal jelly for like skincare or?
Yep.
You know,
Does
yeah,
that,
no,
like, is there any evidence that works?
There is, and there's again not my area of expertise, so I don't want to overspeak, but there's a lot of evidence as well that bee venom is used in cosmetics and has
like
beneficial
Botox.
qualities. Yeah,
Really?
Yeah, it's an astringent.
Like from the stings?
Yeah, so it's
Because
really
bees don't
interesting how
bite
they
you, right?
harvest
They're not
that.
like snakes.
No, it's a stinger
It's from the
only,
stinger
sting in
only,
the butt.
yeah.
But
Wow.
yeah, so it's really interesting how they harvest the bee
So
venom.
I could have like really like taut feet because I got so many bee stings as a like really like young baby skin on my feet.
Yeah, yeah.
See?
Yeah, no, so there's and another reason why bees, there's a lot of applications for everything they produce.
Oh wow, crazy bees. Now going back to the bumblebees, so the queen bumblebee is there underground over winter. How old do they get? Like, are they really long lived?
Not really. So typically a queen will be born in her first year, obviously.
Yeah.
And then will leave her hive, which is all her mum and her sisters.
Right.
She'll leave her hive, be mated by males from another colony.
Right. In flight.
In flight, go find where to camp out for the winter, and then she can live another year or two.
Right.
I
so
believe
the first year she doesn't really have a colony.
No, so her main job is getting mated and getting
Right.
tough enough to tough out the winter.
Right. So she's just eating.
Yeah. Eating and sleeping.
Right.
In preparation for a lot of work, though. So she gets,
Right, okay.
gets
so
an
that's,
easy
that's
first
kind
year.
of your 20s out there doing the dance, eating, drinking.
Collecting sperm from others.
Right. And then
then you're just producing larvae for the rest of your life. Oh my.
Yeah.
I think I got off that idea.
And it reminds me of I just used to love the series. I don't know if you've seen it. Mistress of the Empire, Daughter of the Empire. There's a alien species in it which are like bees, and it's the same sort of thing. Anyway, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it if you're into sci-fi. I think it's a great one.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the bees. So we've talked a lot about the female bees, and obviously all the workers are females.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the males, where do they come from? What's the point of the males?
Well,
Why don't they put the males to work?
question we've been asking for years.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, why don't they put the males to work?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And in some of the solitary bee species, you do see some males foraging.
Right.
But they really don't have any parental investment. The guys are just around to mate, and they die off.
And then they die off.
Yep.
So they're really quite short-lived compared to
Yeah.
even to the workers.
Very, like, months
Right.
at most.
So
yeah.
they get fed enough as babies
To
so
do
that
what
once
they
they
need to
hatch,
do.
they can fly off and mate with the new queens.
Yep.
And there must be quite a lot fewer males than there are
Yeah,
females in
yeah.
that case, right?
And
'Cause I've-
very, very specific times of the season. So only once, the new queens are being produced and
Right.
signals are sent within the hive, our new queens are getting ready. Let's start
so
making some males.
yeah.
Right, because you don't want your new queens mating with your males, right?
No, yeah.
So you want to split them up time-wise if you can.
And that's thought of kind of as one of the evolutionary mechanisms to prevent inbreeding.
Right.
Is why the males are so short-lived, and they're fed enough that they can do their job to mate and then leave.
Right.
So you don't want to be mating with your sisters.
Yeah,
So
if
you
you
want
can,
to get
yeah.
out and fly as far away as possible
Right.
to spread your wild, sow
Yeah,
your
it's
wild
interesting,
oats.
isn't it? Because like you can sort of time that within a hive, right? But you can't coordinate it between hives.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so that's
and so that's where you can kind of get into that coevolution with plants, is
Right.
because the bees will be at the most active point of their colony cycle when their
When the
preferred
flowers are flowering
in
the
bloom.
most, yeah.
So in that way, they kind of feed off of each other, and you get this interannual variation in, are the blooms coming out at the same time that the bees are emerging, or
goodness.
and
Yeah,
as you get into climate change and different
and
aspects
seasons
of that.
change, seasons coming faster, and cold
Yeah.
spells, and oh my goodness, yes,
Yeah.
no, it's all crazy. Oh, we could talk forever. Hey, and that is our 56 minutes up there, Connal. Thank you very much for coming along.
Yeah, thank you for
It's
having
been
me.
very interesting. And
Fascinating.
yeah, honestly, who knew that much about
Exactly.
bumblebees? Obviously, Connal.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you've enjoyed this interview, you'll almost certainly enjoy our previous interview with Jenny Yant, and probably the one with Janice as well, I think.
Yeah, I think so,
Janice.
yeah.
And there was a whole series that we did with Pam McKinley on the art and science, which, of course, Connal was a
Yeah.
part of. Ka kite.
Ati
You've been
wā.
listening to the OI podcast, the shout-out for the arts, sciences and mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.